I found the first folder while my father was trying to burn the rest of my life. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the house was so quiet that I could hear the old attic fan rattling above me like loose bones. I had gone up there because of the storm. A leak had started in the upstairs hallway, and Mark had barked at me from the living room to check the junk room before the ceiling caves in. That was my father's version of affection, one sentence that sounded like an order and a warning at the same time. The attic door was already open when I got to the top of the pull-down stairs. A yellow light burned from a single hanging bulb, and the air smelled wrong. Not just dusty, sharp, bitter, like smoke hiding under cedar and cardboard. Then I saw him. Mark was crouched over an old metal trash can with a lighter in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. Flames jumped inside the can, thin and hungry. He was shoving folders into the fire one at a time, and every few seconds he'd glance toward the attic door like a man expecting a ghost. "Mark?" I said. He jerked so hard he nearly dropped the lighter. For 1 second, his face didn't look like my father's face. It looked like a stranger caught stealing from a corpse. "Jesus, Ava," he snapped, slamming one hand over the can as if that would hide the smoke. "What are you doing up here? I could ask you the same thing." He stood too fast and put himself between me and the can. "Burning junk. Old tax stuff. Your mother kept half this attic like a landfill." "My mother." He said it easily, with that faint little twist in his mouth that always made me feel like I was being corrected for something I didn't understand. Helen had been dead for 19 years, and even now he could still say her name with enough care to sound like a man who missed her. But I knew my father too well. I knew the tiny pulse in his neck when he lied. I knew the way his right hand twitched when he was angry. I knew the difference between his "don't ask questions" voice and his "I am about to ruin your life" voice. And this was the second one. "Old tax stuff doesn't usually have the word confidential stamped in red across the folder," I said. His eyes flicked to the folder in my hand before he could stop himself. That was enough. I opened it. Inside were copies of legal documents, yellowed letters, and a police report with a date from 19 years ago. The top page had my mother's name on it. Helen Brooks. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to swallow twice. Mark lunged forward, but I stepped back before he could grab it. "Ava, give that to me." "What is this?" I said give it here. "No." The smoke from the trash can curled around his face, and in that moment he looked older than I'd ever seen him. Not just tired, but cornered. Dangerous. His expression changed from anger to something colder. "You have no business reading private papers. These are about my mother. That woman is dead." The words hit the room like a slap. He heard it too. I saw it in the second after he said it. He exhaled hard, like he wanted to take it back and couldn't. My hands were shaking as I flipped the page. The police report was incomplete, but what was there made the room tilt beneath me. A redacted witness statement, a note about a vehicle registered to Mark Brooks, a mention of a missing life insurance policy, a handwritten annotation in the margin that said, "Possible tampering with scene." I looked up at him. "What did you do?" For a second, he didn't answer. The attic light buzzed overhead. Somewhere downstairs, the old pipes knocked once, like a nervous heartbeat. Then Mark said, in a voice so quiet it barely sounded like him, "You need to put that back." That was when I knew. Not suspected, not wondered. Knew. My family had been lying to me for years. Not the normal kind of family lies. The sort where people pretend not to notice your bad haircut or your failed relationship. This was something darker, older. Deliberate. The kind of lie that grows roots in the ground and waits for a child to become an adult before it springs shut. I didn't know it yet, but the folder in my hands was the first piece of evidence that my entire life had been built on a crime. I was raised in a house that looked perfect from the outside. The neighborhood was the kind people envied from their cars as they passed through on the way to the highway. Wide lawns, brick homes, trimmed hedges, the kind of place where every family seemed to own at least one golden retriever and one American flag. Our house sat on the corner with white columns on the porch and a swing that creaked in summer. To outsiders, we were the Brooks family, reliable and respectable. My father, Mark, ran a small contracting business and had the habit of smiling with his whole face when people were watching. My stepmother, Diane, was the polished one. She sold real estate, wore pearl earrings to grocery stores, and could make a casserole sound like a favor from heaven. My younger brother, Ethan, was the golden child, all baseball medals and perfect hair and easy laughter. And then there was me, Ava, the quiet one, the grateful one, the one who was always told she was lucky. My mother died when I was 8. That was the official version. What I was told for years was that Helen had been driving home late from work on a rainy night when another car crossed the center line and hit her. A tragedy, a random accident, something no one could have stopped. Mark told me that when I was young, then again when I was older, each time with the same carefully sad face, as if repetition turned grief into truth. After she died, he married Diane 11 months later. People made little sympathetic noises about that too. He needed help, they said. He had 2 children to raise, they said. It was a practical marriage, they said. Love after loss, they said, like they were describing a man choosing a different brand of detergent. I believed all of it because I was a child, and because children believe the adults who feed them, clothe them, and tell them what happened to their mothers. But even before I found the folder, the cracks had been there. My family had a way of loving me in public and forgetting me in private. Diane would smooth my hair in front of neighbors and call me sweetheart, then hand me her dry cleaning and tell me to stop being dramatic if I ever cried. Mark would clap me on the shoulder at family cookouts and tell everyone how proud he was of the way Ava turned out. Then later tell me I was too sensitive when I asked why Ethan got new things and I got hand-me-downs. Ethan got summer camp, tutoring, a car for his 17th birthday, and every excuse in the world. I got a used laptop, extra chores, and the expectation that I would be available whenever anyone needed something from me. By the time I was 16, I had become the person who kept everything from falling apart. I was the one who remembered doctor appointments, paid the electric bill online when Mark forgot, and drove Ethan to school when his truck was in the shop. I was the one who watched Diane spiral after bad days at work and sat with her while she cried about clients, then listened to her tell people I was such a blessing because she had somehow managed to turn my labor into her own virtue. When I got a part-time job after school, Mark told everyone I was learning responsibility. When I used my paycheck to buy my own clothes, Diane praised me for being independent, the way people praise a dog for not chewing the couch. I learned to live inside the role they assigned me, useful, invisible, grateful, and I stayed because that was my family. Because if you grow up being told you are lucky to be kept, you begin to confuse survival with love. At 27, I still lived in that house. Not because I wanted to. Because I had never quite managed to leave cleanly. After college, I came back for what I told myself would be 6 months. 6 months became 2 years. I had a decent job in accounting for a medical supply company 20 minutes away, and every time I tried to save enough money for an apartment, something happened. Ethan needed help with tuition. Diane needed money until the sale closes. Mark needed someone to keep an eye on the books for the contracting business because he hated computers and trusted me more than he trusted anyone else. That should have made me feel valued. Instead, it made me feel trapped. 2 weeks before I found the folder, Mark asked me to sit at the kitchen table after dinner. Diane was there too, hands folded, eyes solemn in a way that immediately made my stomach tighten. Ethan wasn't home. That alone told me this was a serious family event. Mark slid a stack of papers toward me. "We're restructuring things," he said. I frowned. "What things?" "The house. A few accounts. Some legal stuff." He tapped the top page with one thick finger. "You just need to sign where it says." I looked down. Quitclaim deed, power of attorney, authorization forms, One page mentioned a transfer into a family trust I had never heard of. A family trust? I said. Diane smiled, that brittle smile she used when she wanted to look calm. It's just protection, honey. Your father's not getting younger. I'm not signing anything I don't understand. Mark's jaw shifted. There's nothing to understand. We're making sure Ethan is taken care of, and the house stays in the family. What about me? Diane's eyes widened slightly, as if I'd asked a rude question in church. Of course you're in the family. That answer should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel smaller. Because if there's one thing I learned from Diane, it was that people who really love you don't need to remind you, over and over, that you belong. I pushed the papers back. I want to look at them first. Mark's expression hardened. You're being difficult. I'm being careful. After everything we've done for you? The old guilt rose instantly, a reflex so trained it felt physical. After everything we've done for you. That sentence was the skeleton key of my childhood. It opened every door inside me and locked me in. I looked at the papers again, and something about the page order felt wrong. One legal form was clipped to the back of a bank statement. Another page had a handwritten note in the corner that said, "Move before Ava asks questions." I stared at it. Diane saw where I was looking, and snatched the sheet out of my hands so fast the corner tore. It's nothing, she said. Mark stood up. Enough, we're done. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Because now I had the folder from the attic, and whatever hidden lie had been sitting in that house for decades had just stepped into the light. I waited until Mark went downstairs to search for a fire extinguisher he didn't need. Then I grabbed the folder and slipped into my bedroom, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt louder than a scream. I sat on my bed and spread the papers across the quilt. The first thing I found was a letter from an attorney named Leonard Pike, dated 6 months after my mother died. It was addressed to Mark. The second thing I found was a copy of a life insurance application. Helen Brooks was the insured. Mark Brooks was the beneficiary. The policy had been taken out 11 days before her death. My pulse started to pound in my ears. I read the letter twice because the words did not make sense the first time. Mr. Brooks, it stated, per our conversation, the policy cannot be disclosed to your wife. Any references to the children's future care should remain consistent with the estate planning strategy already discussed. I moved to the next page with numb fingers. There were bank records, withdrawals, transfers, a civil settlement from a case I had never heard of, then a copy of my school records attached to a note in Mark's handwriting. Keep Ava in the dark. Any questions go through Diane. My hands went cold. Then I found the letter that shattered the room under my feet. It was from my mother. Not a legal document, not a bank memo. A real letter, folded 3 times and tucked into an envelope with my name written in her handwriting. Ava, it began, if you are reading this, then I am gone, or the truth has finally found you. I do not know which will happen first. I couldn't breathe. I read the rest standing up, because suddenly I couldn't bear the feeling of the mattress under me. My sweet girl, the letter said, I am sorry I could not protect you from him. I am sorry I believed he would change. If anything happens to me, do not trust the accident report. Do not trust the story they tell. I tried to leave. I tried to take you with me. He would not let me go. My stomach lurched. The paper blurred. I braced one hand against the wall and forced myself to keep reading. I have left copies with the lawyer, with the detective, and with Nora, if she is still alive. If they hide everything, remember this, you were never meant to be his. He knows what he did. At the bottom of the page, there was one more sentence, smaller than the rest, almost like an afterthought. If they call themselves your family, it is because names are cheaper than truth. The room went silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even the floorboards seemed to stop creaking. I stared at my mother's handwriting until it dissolved into shapes. He knows what he did. I read it again and again. My own heart sounded far away, like someone pounding on a locked door in another building. For a long time, I just stood there, holding that letter while the worst possibility in the world tried to take shape in my head. I had spent 19 years grieving my mother the way I had been told to grieve her. Accident, rainy road, nothing anyone could have prevented. That was the story I had lived inside. But my mother's final words were not the words of someone who had died in a random crash. They were the words of someone who had been warning me. By 3 a.m, I had gone from disbelief to rage to something colder than both. I went back through every page in the folder. I found a police memo that mentioned a missing tape from the investigation. I found a receipt for a storage unit in Mark's name. I found an old statement from my mother's sister, Nora Whitcomb, saying she had been in contact with Helen the week before she died. The note underneath said, "Contact declined by guardian." Guardian. Mark had been listed as my guardian. But there was another signature on one of the papers. Mine. Or rather, what looked like mine. A forged signature on a consent form, allowing access to my mother's accounts. I stared at it, then at the bank records, and something inside me broke open with a force so clean it was almost calm. They hadn't just lied to me. They had used me. My family had spent years pretending to love me while moving money, hiding records, and building a life on top of my mother's grave. And the darkest part was not even the money. It was that my mother had known. She had tried to save me. She had left proof, and they had buried it in the attic like rotten meat. I did not sleep. At sunrise, I made coffee I did not drink and sat at the kitchen table waiting for Mark, Diane, and Ethan to wake up. The folder was beside me. My phone was on the table with Nora Whitcomb's name, which I had found in the old paperwork and looked up online at 4:17 a.m. She lived 2 hours away in Columbus, still alive, still practicing law, according to her firm's website. When Mark came into the kitchen, half-dressed and irritated, he froze the second he saw the folder. I pushed the letter toward him. His face changed when he read the first line. I watched the blood drain from it. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "In the attic, the place you were trying to burn clean last night." Diane appeared behind him, hair pinned up, robe tied tight at the waist. Her gaze fell to the folder and then to Mark's face. I saw her understand before he said a word. "Ava," she said too softly, "let's not do anything rash." "Rash?" I laughed, and the sound was ugly even to me. "You and Mark stole from my mother, hid documents about her death, forged my signature, and you're worried about rash?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. "Lower your voice." "No." Diane flinched. Ethan came in just then, still in sweatpants, rubbing sleep from one eye until he saw the room. He stopped dead. "What's going on?" I looked at him, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Ethan had grown up in the same house, but he had never been the one under the knife. He had been loved loudly and carelessly, which in that house meant he had been protected from knowing how cruel the Foundation really was. "I found the truth," I said. Mark scoffed. "There's no truth in those papers. Your mother was unstable. She was making threats. You don't know what you're talking about." I turned to Diane. "Did she make threats before she died too? Or is that the story you all agreed on after you took her money?" Her mouth tightened. "You're upset. You're misreading things." "Then explain the life insurance policy." Silence. I slid the policy application across the table. Mark glanced at it once and looked away. Ethan reached for the letter, read a few lines, and his face changed in stages. Confusion, then shock, then something like betrayal. "Dad?" he said. Mark rounded on him. "Not now." Ethan's voice rose. "No now. What is this?" Mark had the look of a man whose lies were running out of road. "Your mother is trying to rewrite history because she's angry about the house." "My mother is dead," I said. And that, somehow, was the line that made Diane's composure crack. She looked at me with a kind of cold pity that made my skin crawl. "You have no idea how difficult it was to keep this family afloat after Helen died." The words landed in the kitchen like a threat. I actually laughed again, this time from sheer disbelief. "Keep this family afloat?" You stole survivor benefits from a child. Mark's chair scraped back. Watch your mouth. You took my mother's settlement money. We used that money to raise you. No, I said. You used that money to raise Ethan. Ethan's face went white. I didn't even mean to say it with such force, but it came out anyway, sharp as a cut. You had my mother's estate moved through an account under Diane's name. You used my school survivor benefits for renovations. The records are right here. Diane's eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. Those were family expenses. You mean the new kitchen? She didn't answer. You mean Ethan's truck? Still nothing. You mean the pool? Mark stepped toward me. You don't understand what you're accusing us of. I understand enough. That was when I called Nora Whitcomb. I put the call on speaker so they could hear. The phone rang twice. Whitcomb Law, this is Nora. Nora, I said, my voice shaking in spite of me. My name is Ava Brooks. I found a letter from my mother. She said to contact you if I ever had questions about her death. There was a silence on the other end that lasted exactly one breath too long. Then Nora said, very carefully, Ava, where are you right now? In my father's house. Is anyone there with you? Yes. Put them on speaker. I did. Nora, I said, did my mother leave something with you? Another pause. Then the answer came. Yes. Diane made a sharp sound under her breath. Mark's face went stone gray. Nora continued, her voice now steady and hard. Ava, your mother came to me 3 days before she died. She was afraid. She said if anything happened to her, Mark would try to make it look like an accident. She brought copies of financial records and a statement from a detective who had concerns. I filed them away because the case was closed and I was told. She stopped. I was told the family wanted privacy. I should have pushed harder. My knees nearly gave out. Did she say how she would die? I asked. Nora inhaled. She said if she disappeared, I should not assume it was an accident. The room was so still I could hear the refrigerator hum. I looked at Mark. His mouth opened once, then closed. Diane's hand had gone to her throat. Ethan was staring at all of us, as if the floor had fallen away beneath his feet. Nora, I said, barely able to speak, the papers in the attic show a life insurance policy, a forged signature, bank transfers. If you help me, can we reopen this? We can do better than reopen it, she said. I can send an investigator to you today. Do not confront them alone again. Do you understand me? I understood. The problem was that I had already confronted them, and now there was no going back. The investigator arrived that afternoon. His name was Daniel Reeve, and he had the kind of face that made you believe in bad news because he looked like a man who had spent a lifetime collecting it. Nora came with him 3 hours later, carrying a leather case and wearing no expression at all except anger sharpened into professionalism. They asked questions. I answered them. Mark denied everything. Diane cried on cue, the way some women can cry as easily as switching on a lamp. Ethan sat at the edge of the living room with his head in his hands, looking sick. The investigator took the attic folder and photographed every page. He found more in the basement storage room, including insurance statements, old account transfers, and a locked box that Mark had hidden behind Christmas decorations. Inside were letters from my mother, 2 cassette tapes, and a copy of a county road maintenance report marked with notes in pencil. One note was circled 3 times. Truck observed near impact site. Another line read, driver identified as Mark Brooks. My lungs forgot how to work. The investigator asked Mark if he wanted to explain the documents before law enforcement got involved. Mark laughed. Actually laughed. He must have thought that was still an option. You people are wasting your time, he said. My wife was unstable. She threatened me constantly. She was dragging my name through the mud because she couldn't handle the divorce. Divorce? I repeated. Diane turned to him so fast her robe belt nearly came loose. Mark! He had said too much. I could see it the instant he heard himself. The lie he had been standing on for 19 years had just cracked at the center. Divorce? I said again, louder now. You told me she died in an accident. Mark's face flushed. She was going to leave. With me? I whispered. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The worst truth was always the smallest one. Not a grand confession, not a theatrical villain's speech. Just a silence long enough to tell you that your life had been decided without you. My mother had tried to take me and failed. My father had kept me and called it love. The police arrived before sunset. It happened so fast after that. Reporters never showed up in real life, the way they do in movies. There was no dramatic music, no thunder. Just 2 cruisers in the driveway, officers moving with that calm, practiced urgency that says they already know something is badly wrong. They took statements. They collected the folder, the tapes, the files. Mark argued until one of the detectives calmly read him the list of potential charges: fraud, forgery, tampering with evidence, financial exploitation, obstruction, and suspicion of homicide pending review of the reopened case. At the word homicide, Diane made a noise like she'd been punched. Mark turned on me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw him without the mask. "You did this," he hissed. I took 1 step back. "No, you did. You ungrateful little..." The detective cut him off. "Sir, sit down." Mark did not sit. He pointed at me with a shaking finger. "After everything I gave you," and there it was again, the sentence that had ruled my childhood. "After everything I gave you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me settle into place. "You didn't give me anything," I said. "You kept what my mother left behind and called it sacrifice." Diane's eyes were wet now, but not from remorse, from fear. She had spent nearly 20 years helping Mark bury the past, and now the past had come up through the floorboards and taken a seat in her living room. One of the detectives asked her a question I will never forget. "Did you know the life insurance policy was taken out before the crash?" Diane's lips parted. She looked at Mark. He looked at her. That was all the answer anyone needed. Her face changed then, not into confession, into calculation. People always assume that when a lie is exposed, the liar immediately collapses into grief. The truth is uglier. Most of them start looking for somebody else to blame. Diane found her voice and said, "I never wanted this. He said it was for the children. He said Helen was unstable. He said if I helped him keep things organized, we could protect Ava." "Protect me." She said it in the same tone she might have used to describe an umbrella in a storm. The detective wrote it down anyway. Ethan didn't say much at first. He just sat there, staring at the rug as if he could disappear inside the pattern. Then, hours later, after the police had taken Mark into custody for questioning, Ethan asked to speak to me outside. It was almost dark by then. The sky over the backyard had gone the color of bruised steel, and the porch light threw weak yellow circles on the steps. "I didn't know," he said immediately. I crossed my arms. "You knew enough." His eyes went glassy. "I knew Dad was hiding things. I knew there was money stuff. I didn't know about Mom. I swear I didn't." I believed him, at least enough to know he wasn't the mastermind. But that didn't mean he was innocent. "You let me be treated like I was less than you," I said. "You watched them do it. I was a kid. So was I." He flinched. "Good. He should have." Ethan scrubbed a hand down his face. "I'm sorry." The word was too small for what had happened, but it was honest. I looked at him and saw, for the first time, not the golden child, but a boy who had grown up inside a lie as well. The difference was that he had been loved inside it. I had been used. "I need the truth from you," I said. "Did you ever see anything? Hear anything? Anything about my mother?" His jaw trembled. Then he said, "Once, when I was 12, I heard them fighting. Dad and Mom Diane and Dad." He shook his head quickly. "Not over money, over papers. Diane said the road report had to stay missing. Dad said if Helen had taken you, it would have ruined everything." My blood turned to ice. "Ruined what?" Ethan swallowed. "He said the policy would never pay if anyone looked too hard." I stared at him. There it was. Not a confession. A fragment. Just enough to confirm what my mother had warned. The accident had not been an accident. My mother had been trying to leave, and Mark had been standing in the way. The state attorney reopened the case the next week. What followed was not dramatic in the way television likes to make justice seem. It was slower, meaner, and far more exhausting. There were interviews, subpoenas, old witnesses tracked down, accountants called in, and enough paper spread across Nora's office to make me feel like my entire childhood had been translated into receipts. The investigator found the missing tape from the police station in an evidence drawer that had been mislabeled for nearly 2 decades. On it, a tow operator could be heard saying he saw Mark's truck near the crash scene before emergency services arrived. Another witness finally came forward and admitted Diane had visited her weeks after the death to ask whether certain details had been recorded in the report. The story that followed was ugly but clear enough to break open the lies. Mark had not killed my mother with his own hands, but he had set the chain in motion. He had been involved in financial fraud through his business. Helen had discovered enough to threaten him with divorce and exposure. She had tried to leave with me. He had intercepted her. There had been a struggle, and after she died in the crash, he had done what desperate men do when they realize the truth can still ruin them. He buried the evidence and built a better story. Diane had known enough to help cover it up. She had helped with the account transfers. She had helped hide the policy. She had helped present the performance of a grieving, blended family to anyone who asked. And for years, that performance had worked. Until the attic. The charges changed as the evidence came in. The prosecutors could prove fraud first, then the financial crimes, then obstruction and forgery. The homicide case took longer, and I won't pretend it ended in some perfect courtroom thunderclap. Real life is not tidy, but the reopened investigation made it impossible for the state to keep calling my mother's death a simple accident. Mark was held without bail after the financial records revealed he had hidden assets and was a flight risk. Diane lost her real estate license while the ethics board investigated. The house was seized during the civil proceedings because too much of its value had been tied up in stolen funds and fraudulent transfers. The business collapsed within months. And Ethan? He testified, not because he was suddenly noble, and not because he deserved applause. He testified because he was the only one left who had lived inside that house and could confirm the arguments, the forged signatures, the secret meetings, the way Mark had forced everyone to stay silent. His statement didn't save him from shame, but it mattered. It helped close the door on the lie. When he called me after the deposition, his voice cracked on my name. "I should have listened to you sooner," he said. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall of my apartment, the first apartment I had ever rented on my own, paid for with money that was finally, legally mine. "Yes," I said quietly. "You should have." He was silent a moment, then, "Do you hate me?" The answer should have been easy, but hatred takes energy, and I had spent too many years giving mine to people who fed on it. "No," I said. "I don't think I have room for that anymore." That made him cry. I heard it in his breathing. I didn't comfort him, not because I wanted him hurt, but because I had spent my entire life comforting other people, while my own grief sat unnoticed in my chest like a stone. After the arrests, Nora helped me untangle the rest. My mother had left behind a small trust that Mark had tried to bury under his own names and shell accounts. Because of the evidence, it was finally returned to me. Along with what remained of the settlement money and the insurance proceeds, he had not been able to spend cleanly. There was enough to pay for the civil settlement, enough to buy a modest condo, enough to breathe. The first night I slept there, I woke up at 3:12 a.m., expecting to hear Mark moving around the hall or Diane opening cabinets in the kitchen. Instead, there was only silence. Real silence. Not the kind that waits for someone to call your name. The kind that belongs to you. I cried then, unexpectedly and hard, because that silence felt more dangerous than the attic had. Justice is a strange thing when it finally arrives. It does not heal you. It does not hand you a new childhood, or give your mother back, or erase the years you spent believing you were hard to love. What it does is simpler and smaller and somehow more important. It tells the truth out loud, and once the truth is spoken, the lie starts to die. Months passed. The court hearings continued. The local paper printed a short article about financial fraud and a reopened fatal crash investigation from years earlier. People who had once admired my family stopped using our last name with such ease. Neighbors who used to wave at Mark from their driveways now looked away when they saw me in public. That hurt, but less than I expected. I realized I had never actually belonged to the version of the Brooks family they admired. I had been labor inside it. One afternoon, Nora called and told me the prosecutor believed the old case would likely end in a plea on the financial crimes and a formal acknowledgement that the crash was caused by reckless and unlawful conduct rather than a clean accident. It was not the prison sentence I had imagined when I was angry at 2 a.m. in the attic, but it was enough to destroy the story Mark had built. "Ava," Nora said, "your mother was right to leave those papers. She knew what he was." I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee gone cold and stared at the stack of legal envelopes in front of me. "Why didn't she leave sooner?" I asked. Nora was quiet for a moment, because people like him make leaving feel impossible until one day it becomes the only sane thing left. That night, I took the folder out of the box where I had stored it and read my mother's letter again. I had avoided doing that for weeks, because it still hurt in the same exact place every time. But this time, I got to the last line and stopped crying long enough to truly see it.